This week on Supercars Talk, we can all become Dave Reynolds fans again. Now, I don't want to enrage Peter Addison anymore, so first things first, I'd like to mention that this weekend's racing was brought to you by Boost Mobile. He was not happy with the commentators recently, and I think Auto Action not mentioning that it was the Boost Mobile Gold Cover 600 this weekend. So don't want him on my bad side. Anyway, the big news this week is that James Courtney was confirmed to be leaving Tickford, Todd Hazelwood was confirmed to be leaving Blanchard's, and then Blanchard's announced that Courtney and Aaron Love will be their lineup for next year in the newly expanded two-car team. James Courtney will be in the Snowy River Caravans number 7 car, the wildcard entry, while Aaron Love will be in the number 3 Cool Drive car there. It's not bad. Todd Hazelwood hasn't had the best of years. Is it a little bit unfair on him getting dumped for these guys? Well, we'll see next year, and we'll see what the results are, whether it gets any better or worse. Now, there was some parity changes for the weekend. Ford had done some calculations and said that they were 0.42 seconds a lap slower around Bathurst. I think it was, the way it was worded was very strange. Anyway, so they proposed changes that would make 0.308 of a difference per second. Do we see the problem here? Now, the aero changes that were put in for Gold Coast, they said that that was supposed to make a 0.24 of a second difference. So if they're 0.42 slower, they've proposed changes to make them 0.308 faster. So there'd still be around about a 0.12 second difference between. Wouldn't you be making the changes to make them equal, rather than saying, hey, these are the changes we want, but we still don't think we're fast enough with these changes? Anyway, results over the weekend probably prove that there's no issues to be had. We won't hear anything about this ever again. But Supercars will be sending 2 cars over to the wind tunnel over there in North Carolina, I think it is, over in America, for some Christmas fun. It will be the 888 Wildcard will be going over there, and the car Will Davison was running most of this year until he switched over to the DJR Wildcard car for this weekend. So those 2 actual race cars going over to be tested in the wind tunnel, and they will be doing the dyno testing. I don't fully understand the difference between what's going on, because as far as I knew, they'd done dyno testing with the engines in cars, but I'm not sure on all that. But everything, once they do this testing, there'll be no questions about parity ever again. So we won't have to talk about it ever again, will we? That is sarcasm there, internet. We're going to be hearing about it forever, because I can just imagine, probably if you jumped on Bookface and Instagram and all that today, that they'd be saying that the Mustang changes went too far and now it's unfair that Camaros can't win. But that's the world we live in. Anyway, let's talk about some racing from the weekend. Curb strikes. It was a bit of an issue during qualifying, but it wasn't a massive thing during the race. A lot of drivers did end up getting the 5-second penalties during the race. Some even got a 10-second penalty because they did it again. It wasn't clear whether you got like 3 or 5 or 10 strikes before you got your 5-second penalty. And then when you got the warning, was it just one more time and then you got the penalty, or was it like 2 or 3 before you got the penalty? And then if you had a penalty, was it like one more and you got another 5-second penalty, or did you have to? Anyway, it wasn't as big a thing, and the main guys, although they got their warnings in general, I think most of them got a warning at some point, it didn't really affect the main results of the weekend, so it wasn't such an issue. Qualifying obviously was a lot bigger issue, and then in the top 10 there were a few guys who got the curb strikes, but in general the racing over the weekend, how good was it? Both races coming down to a nail biter between a Mustang and a Camaro, so that's all we can ask for, isn't it? Some actual nail biting racing, and they weren't massively affected by, actually there was no safety car on Saturday, so it's not like you got that grandstand finish because you had a safety car with like 3 laps to go. It was genuine close racing, and it was different guys both days in that fight for the win. A little bit different this weekend. I just want to talk about a couple of incidents before I do the team by team rundown. The first one was in race 1, the Payne and Courtney incident at the back chicane there. Now, there was a gentleman's agreement about who was in front at the braking board, had the right of way. Now, Payne, he was on the right side of the road, but he was slightly behind. But he was the one doing the pass, and he'd kind of come up. And I think at that point, probably Courtney should have let him go. Obviously, they didn't, and Courtney did have the right of way. Payne ended up getting a 5-second time penalty for it. But I think in that situation where you are the car with the momentum, Payne did, you know, he had the momentum, he braked later, etc. He was probably the car in front and probably the more deserving. Now, of course, there is the letter of the law, but I think in situations like that, it should be a bit like, well, Courtney, you probably should have just let him go because you were the one being passed, I suppose. Rather than issuing a penalty on it. And yeah, we obviously don't want to see massive accidents there, but I think a little bit of common sense on some of these, that like, yes, okay, letter of the law, they were very close. A bit like the penalty at Bathurst with Reynolds and I think it was Reynolds and Feeney with the safety car line. Bit of common sense on it, that, you know, it's very hard to judge who's millimetres in front when you're going at full tilt in a situation like that. The other incident was the Golding rejoin there on Sunday towards the end of the race with Scott Pye. Yeah, Golding having a really, really good run. He was in 4th at the time, clipped that tyre barrier coming out of the first chicane, spun around, and then, yeah, gave it a flick spin right as Pye was coming through. Now, there was no penalty for Golding because technically he didn't rejoin or anything like that. Pye not very happy about it, getting on social media. Beardo has come out and explained, obviously, that, you know, nothing to see here, it's all fine, he doesn't deserve a penalty. Once again, a bit of common sense. There's cars coming at you at full tilt. Don't flick spin in front of them. Pretty simple there. But also, yellow flags out, probably should be slowing down, and this is what I've been saying for a long time. Even if like a safety car had been called at that point, the guys would have been blazing through at full speed. Now obviously Pye's saying 6 seconds, not enough time to slow down. Yeah, yellow flags into a corner like that, you can't see the car that's crashing or whatever. Back it off a bit, I think. But of course, the way the rules are at the moment, you just go blazing through. So yeah, how do you fix this? Well, you actually have to slow down for yellow flags, but that's not going to happen because it's unfair on people. So I don't have a solution, but yeah, Beto and Pye, social media, probably not the right place to be having this argument. Yeah, maybe get together and maybe in the next the driver's briefing in Adelaide, you know, maybe that's the time for it, not getting out on Instabook and, yeah, having a crack at each other. Now, running it through the teams in reverse championship order. So kicking it off is Blanchard's. Todd got a double curb help penalty on Saturday. Yeah. Is that the highlight of the weekend from them? Best qualifying of 20th and best finish of 18th. Yeah, not much to report here. So I can kind of see why they're having a clean sweep of drivers, but is the driver the problem there? Because I don't think it's all Todd's fault. But yeah, Matt Stone Racing, another one, race 1, not great. LeBrock got mechanical black flag. He had a coolant leak in the car and did not finish. Cam Hill had steering damage and finished 23rd. In race 2, Cam Hill had a solid run from 24th on the grid up to 15th. That's the highlight of their weekend. Team 18, the anonymous team of the pit lane. Pye was actually really impressive this weekend. Yeah, I mean, he has a job for next year. I don't know what he's doing the big audition race for, but qualifying 7th and 11th, finishes of 6th and what would have probably been 6th on Sunday if it hadn't been for Golding. Spinning him, getting in his way, whatever we're going to call it, because Beardo says it's all fine. Frosty qualified 15th and then 5th, but only 12th and 9th in the races, but actually quite a solid weekend from Team 18. A nice bounce back from their troubles at Bathurst and yeah, their engineering shuffles that happened because of that. Premier Air Racing, once again, a very up and down weekend from these guys. They both made a top 10 shootout each, but only finished 17th and 21st on Saturday. Slade had a DNF on Sunday after tangling with James Courtney when they kind of got pushed wide at the hairpin on lap 1 by Declan Fraser. Locked wheels, a surprisingly large amount of damage to Slade's car, considering it wasn't that big a hit. Well, it didn't look like that big hit, just must have been on the right angle for it. Yeah, and then Golding was... he ended up finishing 6th in the end on Sunday, but it probably could have been 4th, and I think that would have been their best result for the year, had it not been for that spin and awkward rejoin. That was obviously fine. Grove Racing. Now, Payne or Reynolds, which one was the star of the weekend? These guys just really, really solid. So, Grove Racing, star of the weekend. Payne qualified 2nd and 3rd for the 2 races. Reynolds was 5th and 2nd in qualifying. Yeah, pretty much the top team out there overall. Payne did drift in race 1 back down to 9th. You know, he learnt though for Sunday then. He was right in the fight and ended up 4th. Reynolds though, very, very impressive weekend. 3rd on Saturday, and then obviously taking the win there on Sunday, holding off Brody Kostecki there for the win. Just looked like the Reynolds of a few years ago, and yeah, you must think that he's maybe having a little bit of a question in the back of his mind. Maybe I should have taken the 1-year deal with the Groves rather than going for the longer term deal with Team 18, because right now, yeah, since Tander got in that car at Sandown, they've had a very upward trajectory again, and yeah, you can only imagine that they're just going to get stronger and stronger and continue this kind of form into next year. Looking really good for Richie Stanaway though. Walkinshaw Andretti United. Chaz qualified 6th and 4th in the races, but it looked like they forgot to put the aero changes on his Mustang because he just went backwards in the races and finished 8th and 13th. Yeah, just very middle of the road weekend from Chaz. Cam Waters Racing. Yeah. Tickford. Cam kicked off the weekend amazingly. Fastest in qualifying on Saturday, fastest in the top 10 shootout, went out and won the race. Hold off Shane Van Gisbergen for the win there. Just, yeah, a really, really solid day. Sunday, he started off the same, fastest in qualifying, but then overshoot, coming off the end of the back straight on his top 10 shootout lap. Ended up starting 7th after all of the other people curb hopping and things like that. Fought his way up to the bottom step of the podium. Just, yeah, a really, really, really solid weekend from Cam Waters. If he can continue this form into Adelaide and then kick off next year, it could actually be, he will definitely be in the championship hunt next year with form like that. As for the rest of the team, Randall was actually pretty solid all weekend. He got 4th and 7th in each of the races. looking like, actually, as I joke about it being Cam Waters Racing, but Randall definitely made it look more like a two-car team this weekend rather than a one-car team. As for the other two, Courtney was the first one to crash properly, and that was on Sunday morning in qualifying. We got to see the bonnet up over the windscreen. That looked like fun for him driving back to the pits, getting some radio communications on which way to turn and that. Then he also got involved in that lap 1 crash on Sunday with Slade. That was the end of his day. And then Declan Fraser had, the most I saw him on TV was when he came out in front of Brodie when he stopped and was about to be lapped, and it looked like he got out of the way of Brodie at first on the back chicane. But it was actually the wheel wasn't put on properly or whatever, and the brake disc was cutting through that wheel, so the wheel was actually falling off the car, and he wasn't actually getting out of the way for niceties. He was getting out of the way because he had to. Dick Johnson Racing. I think they might have got the same aero updates as Walkinshaw's did. Anton was in the top 10 shootout on Sunday. That's about all of the highlights. Interestingly, in that top 10 shootout, he got done for a curb strike. The way the car kind of pitched sideways going through the first chicane, to me, it actually didn't look like, it looked like his rear wheel was in bounds or like still on the track. But because the car was so crossed up, the sensor was probably over the sensor point in the track. So I think the car was still technically in bounds, but it set the sensor off because of where the sensor was. It's all a bit of semantics in the end though, because he did have an electrical issue in the race, which rendered his performance useless. And Davison was like Percat. At least I did mention Davison's name. Didn't even mention Percat when we were at Walkinshaw Andretti's, did we? Moving on. Brad Jones Racing, Jaime, you need to learn how to qualify, and you might do a better job in the races. It always seems like you're trying to fight back from bad qualifying. Jack Smith had a broken alternator in race 1. Fullwood had a broken radiator in race 1. Jones got himself involved in that lap 1 crash on Sunday with Courtney and Slade. That was the highlights of the weekend for those guys. Actually, it's a bit unfair on Fullwood. He did get himself in the top 10 on Sunday. He is in the top 10 of the championship. He's not doing bad, really. He's been a pretty solid number 2 to Jaime this year. Quite anonymous weekend for Brad Jones Racing. At least, usually they get themselves involved in a really big crash or something at the Gold Coast. So, it's a bit spectacular. This was just very, very quiet from them. 888 Racing. A very, very quiet weekend from these guys. The only notes I actually took for the two of these guys over the weekend was Q2, or Sunday's qualifying session, Brock Feeney over the radio complaining about traffic at the last corner and getting held up. It was actually Declan Fraser in the wall and people were driving slowly past him because of the yellow flags. So I don't know how you complain about traffic and having to slow down when there's yellow flags because the car is stopped in the tyre barrier. Anyway, he was only 14th and 8th in the races. Ordinary. And Shane Van Gisbergen, a very quiet weekend from him. We're so used to him winning everything that when he doesn't, it just seems like an unspectacular weekend from him. He did take the fight to Waters on Saturday and then finished 5th on Sunday, but just a very, I suppose, quiet weekend from him. We do expect him to at least win 1, 2, if not 3 races over a weekend. So something like this. He has kept himself within the fight though for the championship, with Brodie obviously having very similar results, which I suppose that gets me into Erebus. Q1, Brodie was the first to have a curb strike, so he started 10th. Will Brown also had the gear change problem in normal qualifying, so he had to start from last. Kostecki got himself back up to 5th in the race, which obviously then with Shane being 5th on the Sunday, and then Brodie was 2nd on Saturday, Sunday, I've forgot my days, but they both got a second and a fifth, so their points negated each other's out over the weekend. Brown came from last up to 11th on the Saturday. Very solid drive through the field, but he shouldn't have been at the back to start with. Then on Sunday, Will Brown got into the top turn shootout, then hit the tyre wall in the shootout, so he ended up starting 10th, or actually, it wasn't 10th, it was 8th because of the curb strikes. So because of his spin, he actually got started in front of the curb strike guys. Kostecki was on pole and then took the fight right up to Reynolds. Very, very close fight. Didn't quite get the win, but still takes the championship lead. And they also have the team's championship lead. I think it's 131 points in the lead for Brody, 140 points in the lead for Erebus. Into the final round, 300 points on offer. It will go down to the wire, but these guys are now the favourites with that kind of lead. They can't just cruise and collect, but to an extent, it needs something bad to happen. Like if Brody has a DNF, all bets are off. Like one little mistake there at turn 8, and yeah, it could be Shane cruising to another championship win on the Sunday there at Adelaide. But it's now, you know, if Brody finishes in front of Shane on Saturday, it's all done and dusted pretty much. But yeah, I don't want to say that they've got it in the bag, but it is definitely looking better for Erebus right now. So that's my review of the racing from Gold Coast on the weekend. The Boost Mobile Gold Coast 500. Don't forget the Boost Mobile part. Anyway, down in the comments, let me know what you thought of the racing over the weekend. What did you think of the Pye and Golding incident as well? That's probably the biggest one. I think a little bit of both, like, Pye should have been prepared there because there's yellow flags waving. He couldn't see Golding, so maybe back it off a little bit. But also, the team premier should have been on the radio and saying, hey, there's cars coming, just sit and wait for a second. But these things all do happen. Yeah, it's all good in theory, but I know, yeah, if I was in that situation, I'd be trying to flick spin the car as fast as possible to get back going again, especially when you're in such a good position in the race. But anyway, yeah, down in the comments, let me know what you think. Until next time, I'm still Dave, and I'll catch you later.